Okay, so we will do this a bit differently from the usual videos. Here, I'll simply be tackling just a few bullet points to just help you get started on some of this, on some of your revision possibly. So unlikely that this can be useful if you don't already know the chapter to some extent. Right, so the first bit is we are looking at political challenges. We are looking at highlighted. Yep, we're looking at challenges for Japan in 1912 to 1932, and there are five factors given here, which can be broken up into sub-factors as well. So first up, we are looking at political challenges in Japan's government. All right, I try as far as possible to follow how the textbook organizes it. And really, the political challenges, something popular most students will talk about would be the how the emperor himself, Yoshihito or Emperor Taisho, was sickly and too weak, all right, to actually command the influence and command the different factions of the Japanese government, right, which was represented in your slides as this triangle. So with so many layers, so many different alliances, it was difficult. If it's okay if the emperor was strong like Emperor Meiji, the father, okay, but the son is not the father, the son is not as influential. So he was sickly and too weak to exercise his full authority. System only works if he's powerful. Furthermore, the general who had assisted the father was aging and also unable to advise the emperor. Right? Without a strong emperor, the division started to be quite obvious. Essentially, you see the military versus the civilian. The civilian, their priority would have been a more internationalist policy of diplomacy. Okay, so if you want to have an example to illustrate this, you can just think of things like the Washington Naval Conference, London Naval Conference. All this was actually Japan was represented by the civilian government, and every time they do this, it wasn't very well received by the military leaders. Therefore, all these fractures start to emerge. There are also divisions within the civilian government itself, which definitely did not help. The two sets would be the Seiyukai and the Minsieto. Were political rivals. So all these fault lines, all these fractures within the civilian government, within the Japanese government, meant that the system was quite fragile, and without that strong authority of the emperor, it would be considered a very frail system. Right. So we move on to the economic challenges. So again, I'm not going to great detail. That was never the intent. So next up, we are looking at economic challenges. Okay, there's one general economic challenge, and then subsequently we're going to focus on the countryside. Okay, for general economic challenge here, right, some of the things that I want to just bring to your attention would be, yes, there was a period whereby Japan was prospering, right, but by early 1920s, you had severe inflation, especially rice. Why we give the example of rice? Because rice is the staple food. All right. Rice is the staple food, so it will affect people the most. Okay, and there was also high unemployment. All this prompted, dissatisfaction towards the civilian government, and presents to be a challenge. Okay, because when you have all these socioeconomic problems, it's more likely that you will blame the civilian government rather than to blame the emperor or blame the military. Okay, then the Great Kanto earthquake, which wasn't very well dealt with by the civilian government, also caused a lot of hardship, a lot of anger as well. Okay, in the countryside, okay, you had the issues with the tenant farmers. All right, so that would be the next set of challenge, whereby majority were tenant farmers. Okay, so basically they don't have a lot, and they pay rent by paying the landlord. So what happens is if the yield for the year is not substantial, okay, they will have very little to eat. So when the harvest is not good, it'll be a big problem. And generally, when you hear of Japan modernizing, we would be led into thinking that the development is quite spread out, but it wasn't. As you know from your lower sec urbanization, the urban areas would be the one that benefits from the amenities, the facilities, better schooling, better electricity, better services, right? So the improved services and infrastructure, okay, was very much yeah limited to cities, right? So you had a growing, I would say, a growing inequality, right? Which would of course render some groups very upset, right? So that's the economic challenges the civilian government will face, or Japan faced in totality in this time period of the 12 to 1932. Okay, tensions within Japan will tackle the rural-urban divide first. So this would be a very clear extension. Challenges in the countryside, you already see emergence of the rural-urban divide, and while that was presented as a challenge in the countryside, you have the rural-urban divide. Okay, how it's being illustrated here is pretty much the emergence of a wealthier class, emergence of wealthier uh, class tied to zaibatsus, and of course the zaibatsus are tied, right, to the civilian elite or the ruling elite. So you have zaibatsus and landlords living it up, okay, and all this unhappiness could be translated into, for example, the rice riots of 1918, right? So yeah, as the name suggests, how the nature of what they're upset with. So again, we keep talking about rice because it is a staple, and of course, when the price of rice goes all over, it's not going to be the elite who will suffer. Okay, it will be the ones who are occupying the lower rungs of society. Okay, that will find it a bit more challenging to deal with these things, right? So, yeah, the riots was of course caused by people being upset with the price of rice increasing to a point whereby it was beyond what they could afford. Right. Other tensions in Japanese society would be the changing role of women, right? With most in most cases where you have modernization taking place, more jobs are on offer. All right. The traditionalists upset that Japan losing its identity. Yeah, this would be a common theme, and also to be clear, there were between the Seiukai and the Minseto, there were those who were more conservative and others more, yeah, Western looking. I wouldn't want to say modern looking, just more Western looking. Okay, so yep, upset at Japan losing its identity, with women finding greater independence. All right, finding greater independence as they have jobs and whatnot. And this was seen as a threat to Japanese values. Okay, so next up, the factor number 4, the impact of banking crisis. I realized that I forgot to highlight, so this is done as well. Next up, impact of banking crisis of 1927. That part is a bit cut off. What we see here would be by 1926, Yoshihito was replaced by Hirohito, who was the leader or the emperor that brought Japan, who was the standing emperor when Japan started the Manchurian invasion and all the way up to the attack on Pearl Harbor, right? And we see over time that there were many economic challenges with regards to like higher prices for rice. We've also seen things to do with some aspects of unemployment, and the banking crisis itself is best illustrated. All right, the idea is that the impression that the banks were not able to cover their withdrawals, okay, leading to a bank run. Yeah. Okay. This actually affected more of the regional banks, okay, the ones that were more that were okay, providing the finances for farms, right? Okay, and of course, if the farmers maybe took a loan to buy a bit of modern equipment, took a loan to expand their farmland, and if they aren't able to cover for their loans, okay, you all know how it works. Like if you default on a loan, the bank will take over, and the banks are again associated with the zaibatsus, the wealthier class, and all that. So again, it compounds to this tension within Japanese society. All right, the banking crisis was, for some it was that, for others it was simply loss of confidence in the banking system, thinking that the farmers who had put their money in the banks were not able to actually were not able to get their money back. Eventually, they were bailed out by the central banks of Japan, right? Loss of confidence towards the modern banking system. Okay. There's a very good, a very clear illustration of this on page 94 of your textbook. Okay, then we move on to the last bit. Again, I'm not going, the plan is not to go into super great detail. Oops, that's not what I intended to do. Okay. Yes. So the Great Depression, all right, we recognize it from the time period of 1929 onwards. Okay, you see there are 5 different sub-impacts. So obviously we know this was a very crucial milestone, all right, very crucial landmark when we are looking at the rise of military rules in Japan, the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany as well. Okay, so definitely something to be aware of, to see that connection as to how an economic depression can cause so much harm to different countries and different aspects of society, right? So, impact of the Great Depression. We'll start off with general impacts. Okay, or just giving more context. Okay, Japan being a very close trading partner of Japan being very close trading partner of America. America is the epicenter of the Great Depression. It was where the Wall Street crash happened, and then subsequently this prompted the Great Depression, where America retreated into protectionism, where they decided that it was best to reduce trade in order to protect their own economy. So when America reduced trade, the country that would be most affected would be Japan, right? And we see this happening in different aspects of their society. So easy uh, one easy illustration of this would be that the drop in silk exports, okay, and which is an example. Ultimately, the Japan's economy dropped by 20%. Just to put things into perspective, to have your economy drop by 20% is, within a matter of 2 to 3 years, is substantial. Okay, your country most countries, they always report that their country is growing, and if you're not growing, it's already a problem. When your economy is actually dropping by 1 or 2%, it's a very big problem. Dropping by 20% is a disaster. Right. So of course, all in all this caused the unhappiness to be very much channeled or focused on the on the civilian government, because they were the ones who were managing Japan's economy. You can't really blame the military. You can't blame the emperor. Okay, he doesn't make all these calls. Right. So just some quick, just some details about the impact on farmers, especially. Japan's exports fell, okay, by an average of about 43%. Right. I'm just going to put 43% here. Right. Just to maybe change the color a bit. Right, there were a lot of disagreements between the landowners and the tenant farmers. All right, and some of these disagreements turned quite violent. Okay, for small businesses, all right, basically, your SMEs, right? So, these days we use the term SMEs. All struggled. Okay, all around. Right, there were twice as many closures of small businesses. Many of these business owners joined protest movements, all right, such as the Imperial Middle Class Federated Alliance. I feel like I'm taking a bit too long, right? So I'm going to, okay. Yep. Right, next up, we have okay, the general impact it had on unemployment, okay, whereby about 15 to 20% of the Japanese workforce lost their jobs. All right, and of course, Japan's labor laws were not very generous. Meaning, if you are terminated, you have only 14 days pay leave or pay to cover you. These days, there are some companies that will give you 1 month for every year you work. So if you've been working about 10 years, you could possibly get 10 months worth of pay despite not working for the company, like just to tide you over. So just to give you a sense of why 14 days is attract a lot of anger and dissatisfaction. The fear of communism also was quite widespread, given that socialism and communist ideas tend to be a bit more attractive when your economy is doing poorly, and we saw this happening in Germany as well. And lastly, all in all, there was this very palpable, very clear disdain for the civilian government, right? Seeing that the elites of Japan, right, such as bank owners, landowners, and zaibatsus, are still living well. They are in cahoots and they are manipulating the system to their advantage. All right. I'm sure these companies themselves also face problems during the Great Depression, but really not to the extent of what the rest would be undergoing. Right, so that wraps up our challenges for Japan in that time period. So any of these 5 factors would be a very good, would be useful in helping you understand and then explain why Japan in that time period was especially frail, and why the dissatisfaction with the civilian government especially was fermenting and then growing over time. Okay, we move on next to the rise of the military influence in the government itself. All right, basically the idea here is that we see a very distinct growth in the popularity. All right, how come it's not this? Okay, fine. A very distinct growth in the popularity of the military government, being able to act independently, going against the wishes of the prime minister, and eventually simply supplanting them in totality, and making for me, like I said, I say to my students, we want to have a very critical point in which we can mark, oh, this is where the military leaders are firmly in power, firmly entrenched in power. Normally, I would go with the appointment of the cabinet after the assassination of Ki Inukai, where 10 members of the 15-member committee. That to me is a very good landmark moment, all right? We need these things to help us explain. When we talk about rise of Hitler, we always say his appointment as chancellor, as a very distinct point in which we know that he has risen in power, right? So, okay, rise of military influence. Okay, the first factor here we have is discontent from the military. So, yeah, yep, no, it works fine. The idea here is the military themselves, okay, they've been increasingly upset with the civilian government, who they feel are not respecting. It's the same kind of unhappiness. So you think of the political parties and Zaibatsu's being in cahoots. So this can be easily connected, right? And them being corrupted and essentially self-serving. Okay, whereas the soldiers, they are very much patriotic, in service of the emperor, in service of in service of Japan. Okay, they didn't appreciate the Great Depression, whereby some of the implications would be that there would be a lot of military cuts in the military budget. All right. So again, for the Navy and the Army who are thinking of long-term plans of expanding Japan, this goes right against what they think is necessary. So the military, even by late 1920s, they are very much not in favor of disarmament. They actually want a stronger Japanese Navy. They want a stronger Japanese Army already. So you can see that this would mean that they would clash with the civilian government, whose priority will not be the same. Right, and a simple illustration of the very clear disagreements between the two sides, all right, would be that, okay, the London Naval Conference, essentially it was a revision of the Washington Naval Conference. Right, Japan wanted better terms at the Washington Naval Conference. The ratio was 5:5:3. Okay, so they wanted a better deal, so to speak. Okay, and they did not get a better deal. All right, so yeah, sorry, we are now at the London Naval Conference here. All right, and then we want to talk about what happened there. Essentially, Japan was mainly represented by the civilian government there, civilian leaders there at the London Naval Conference, and the treaty was ended up with 10:7. Okay, there was that improvement, but it was nowhere near what maybe some of the Japanese citizens, the more militaristic ones, the ones who are more in favor of decisive military rule in Japan, they wouldn't have been impressed by this. And of course, the military leaders themselves, they would have been quite disgusted by this. Right? So an easy way to illustrate this particular incident, all right, is to be able to demonstrate the ratio 10:10:7, Japan getting 7 ships for every 10 Britain and America got, and being able to illustrate why this would be disappointing to Japan and their ambitions. Next up, you have the Manchurian, the issue with Manchuria. All right, it started out, of course, with the assassination of Zhang Zuolin. All right, trying to replace him with a more cooperative leader. All right, so that was the assassination of Zhang Zuolin. Zhang Zuolin was, of course, a Chinese warlord. He calls himself King of North China, but he did have a standing alliance with Japan. He had his own ambitions. He's not happy to just be, King of North China. He did have ambitions to actually travel to Beijing and then to compete there. He was not successful, and Japan didn't see him to be a very useful ally. Therefore, the decision by lower-ranking Kwantong Army members to actually assassinate him. Assassination didn't go very well. Zhang Zuolin's son actually saw the Japanese military being involved in assassination. All right, and ultimately it caused even more instability in the region, with the Chinese warlords having good reason not to side with the Japanese, and then the emperor also criticizing the Kwantong Army's action. All right, the prime minister who was actually unable to force the military to punish those involved, and then the emperor himself recognized that he could not control the military. So as much as it wasn't successful for the military in that sense, the military did also recognize that, yeah, it's not very easy to for the prime minister in Tokyo to actually have real power in Manchuria. Okay, then which brings us to the Mukden incident. So this is done. Okay, the Mukden incident, all right, where you have Japan looking for that excuse uh, to establish their power in Manchuria itself. So the Mukden incident was the Kwantung Army blowing up railway tracks in Mukden. Okay, the Southern Manchurian Railway does actually belong to Japan. All right, as part of what they received for the involvement in the Russo-Japanese War. And of course, the colonel there, Colonel Ishiwara, I'm going to type some stuff down. Okay, I think the name Colonel Ishiwara is pretty important in that he was very supportive of this movement. He wanted to actually settle Japanese farmers on large and fertile lands in Manchuria. Right. So of course, the thinking here also is that Manchuria presents a possible solution to Japan's economic woes. All right. Right. Japan, Manchuria being rich in wheat, cotton, amongst other things, and being quite sparsely populated as compared to Japan, and being adjacent to Korea, which was already a Japanese colony or protectorate, depending on who you're asking. So the Mukden incident was simply an excuse, all right, to blame the Chinese warlords for damaging Japanese property, and then the Kwantung Army moved in to occupy and to defeat the rest of the Chinese warlords, and then to then subsequently rename Manchuria Manchukuo. This victory was very well received back in Japan, with well received by the what's wrong with my spelling today? Yeah, I cannot multitask. Well received by citizens, all right. Also largely due to the propaganda, all right. But very much seen as a solution to Japanese economic problems, even if it wasn't. All right, the sheer act of it would have convinced the Japanese public that the military was doing something to deal with the economic problems we mentioned earlier. Right, so the continuation or the connection between what we looked at earlier, all these economic woes happening here, right, all the economic problems here, right, we could easily use it to help us understand this part here as to why they went ahead to commit that act of starting a war with Manchuria. What am I doing here? All right, yeah, starting a war with Manchuria. So the invasion of Manchuria was well received, and then there is strong connection between the invasion of Manchuria and, of course, the growing opposition to the civilian government, in that because it was so well received by the citizens, it helped all the nationalist movements, the opposition to the civilian government, those movements, the ultra-nationalistic, anti-democratic movements, all right, were all definitely, they got they were all very excited by all these developments, because it is the manifestation or the realization of what they really wanted to see. All right, so the growing opposition, all right, these are ultra nationalistic and anti-democratic, means they don't like the civilian government, they don't like democracy. Why is it I'm spelling here? Oh, there's no spell check. Ultra nationalistic. Yeah, anti-democratic activists, right, such as the Showa Restoration faction, right, who wanted to remove all aspects of the democratic rule and just restore direct rule of the emperor. Okay, hence the Showa Restoration, and then of course Ketsumeden, the League of Blood. Okay, the one that were more involved in some of the assassinations that we're going to see in a while. So, yep, the League of Blood was involved in a string of assassinations, including that of Prime Minister Hamaguchi. Right. Okay, they actually drop a list of names. Okay, basically anyone tied to who they perceive to be part of this civilian government, this civilian government slash Zaibatsu alliance, right? Which culminated in the May 15th incident, right? So that would be a crucial moment, I would say. May 15th incident where Inukai, PM Inukai, was assassinated. Okay, by naval officers who were clearly influenced by the League of Bloods movement. It was actually an attempt to overthrow all of Japan's government and put the military on top, but the people did not rise up, and the attackers were subsequently arrested, put on trial. There was so much sympathy for all these attackers. I've mentioned this in class as well. All right, and the military itself did not condemn the rebellion. Okay, and ultimately, because of all the chaos that took place, the appointment of a Navy admiral as prime minister and an emergency cabinet of 15 members, 10 of whom were from the military. This is what I tend to use to identify as a very poignant moment, a very significant moment to see that, okay, now, the military, they are pretty much the people in charge because they are military leaders holding civilian appointments. So they are making decisions that affect civil society. Yeah. So do try to recognize that this is unusual, right? It's not something you would see. Oh, what did I do? Okay. Yeah, I don't like this from just now. Oh, that's how you do it. Okay. All right, which brings me to the end of rise of military influence. So we use this as the factors we need to explain how is it the military leaders could put themselves in a position of power by about this 1932. I use it as a simple way to tell my students, all right, this would be the important juncture. Okay, so subsequently, of course, now that they're in power, you would see what would be their overall impact on Japan. All right, and of course, the direct connection between this as well as this factor here, where right the consolidation of power, because they are not in absolute power. The civilian government is still there. There are still elections going on all throughout 1930s. There's less interest, less voter turnout for these events, and I would say even the civilian leaders themselves are not in a position to impose themselves. Okay, so you will see a string of things that happen in which the civilian government are diminishing in their prominence, and then we see a great resurgence or a consolidation of power on the part of the Japanese military leaders. All right, so here we go. So first up, we're going to talk about consolidation of military power, increased military influence. So some of the things I just want to bring to your attention here. By 1934, military had strengthened their influence. Like I said, they could take positions in the in civil service, which were originally reserved for civilian politicians. Manchuria was totally given to the Manchuria was under military supervision, occupation, all right, and there was somehow approval of public, okay, and source of national pride, kind of like a thumbs up that yep, we are on the right track with whatever we are doing here, affirming them, right? A bit like some of the things that Hitler did when he remilitarized Ireland. He had the referendum after, and I mean there was no referendum here, but it gave the military that nudge to move, to trudge along, and then to be a bit more, to be more aggressive, to be more emboldened to actually take on more aggressive exercises. Okay. Yep. So it further emboldened them. All right. They went ahead to actually okay. They went after. Yeah. Went after politicians who were pro socialism or pro socialist or communists. All right. Okay. They carried okay through their policy of campaign of electoral purification. Okay, very much clear that this is translated from something else, right? Yeah, campaign of electoral purification to remove corruption from the government. Remember all the things that they were unhappy about or their perception of what they think would be corrupt, right? And over time, fewer and fewer people wanted to vote. Okay, within Japanese military itself, there have been always two factions, right, vying for power, okay, right, and the Imperial Way faction and the Control faction, feud between Imperial Way and Control faction, okay, and it boiled over into an attempted coup by Imperial Way, which ended in failure lah. Because we know Control faction managed to come out on top. Okay, people like Tojo are all from the Control faction. Yeah. So the coup itself definitely strengthened the position of one side, which is the Control faction, and gave them this excuse to be as aggressive as possible, all right, to dominate as much as possible, because they now have that excuse, all right, that there could be possible, yeah, other attempts to destabilize Japan. So this definitely strengthened one side. Okay, once you come out on top, you would be strengthened by this, strengthen the Control faction. Okay, and their vision of what the Navy should be doing was there. And the Control faction did identify America as their more traditional enemy. The Imperial Way was more obsessed with China. There were obvious overlaps into what they envisioned. Okay, but they both had an idea of what future Japan looks like, and if future Japan were to look like that, it would mean that they are on a natural course of collision with America. So that was something that the Control faction was more certain about. All right, yeah, and then loss of political power. Okay, so what are some details that we want to remind you of? Could be things. I mean, it is a direct causal relationship whereby when the military becomes more and more powerful, the civilian politicians would be less and less powerful. All right, 1937, Prince Kunoe appointed as prime minister. All right, and he allowed formation of a cabinet planning office, right? Who were mainly military officers or military leaders. Basically, now Japan's finances, so they manage Japan's spending. Yeah, so essentially, you see the the military cementing their power. I mean, you control the budget. You then can dictate how much money is spent on the military, how much money is spent on education, how much money is spent on different things. You can give direct instructions to certain industries to produce certain things because you are gearing your economy for war, right? Yeah. So yeah, that would be the bit about consolidation of military power, right? In terms of Japan's industrialization, right, what we see here, so Japan's economy. Okay, and really some of the things that you may want to focus your attention on as you're looking at this, you would want to think, okay, how would this actually, how do these things actually benefit or harm uh, the people or Japan's economy? So how does it actually benefit or harm the Japanese people? Is it through social changes? Is it through economic changes as well? How exactly these things did they manage to control Japan's economy? Are they controlling Japan's people? Are they controlling Japan's people through fear? Are they doing so through propaganda? Or maybe they are not, then the control is negated because these are simply in awe of the Japanese military, and they are willing to listen to pretty much anything that they ask them to do. Yep. So Japan's industrialization would be focused on war preparations, right? You have a shift from consumer, okay, whatever you think would be needed for war, focus on heavy industries and chemical production. So you have production of arms, projects like roads, railways, bridges. Railways are especially important. Rise of new zaibatsus, right? Okay, who made profits from large government contracts, but very clear as to what these zaibatsus are not independently coming up with making the decision on what to sell. They are, responding to contract offers that the cabinet planning office would have looked into to gear Japan ready for more conflicts, right? So that was industrialization, right? Okay, some of the names that come out would be Nissan, okay, Mori, right? Quite easy to spell these types, right? So they play a key role in Japan's empire building, key role in exploiting resources in Korea and Manchuria, right? The hope would be that Japan would be a self-sufficient and industrially strong state, right? That was the vision that they were hoping to get. So when you are mounting such projects, the question would also be, all right, you may have contracts with the Zaibatsus, but how about the workers? How would the workers be like? Already in 1931, they passed the Principal Controls Law. Okay, we'll put that in here. 1931, Principal Industries Control Law. Okay, the word control is there, so it does give you an impression of what this will be about. Okay, whereby the government initially left the management of cartels. Cartels would be groups of companies that are working on certain things, specifically like electric power, railways. Okay, but over time, the government became directly involved and even controlled these cartels. By 1936, right, the cabinet brought in or brought the electric power industry under direct government control. Okay, the Zabatus were not, Zabatus would not want to be controlled. They themselves are quite influential, but they could not, they could not fight this law. Okay, then subsequently, this culminated in 5-year plans. Right, whenever I hear 5-year plans, I think of Soviet Union, but uh, even Japan by 1937, 5-year plans to for production of for targets for certain industries. 5-year plans, all right, for the cartels to hit to meet targets. Right. So how do you then manage the workers who probably be working harder, and because it's a government contract, the pay would be at pegged at a certain level. All right. The Initially the government was quite sympathetic to labor unions. By 1936, though, they no longer favored the unions and forced workers to withdraw. Okay, by now we should know what unions are. Okay, we were first introduced to this concept in our lower sec, right? So should be a lot more familiar by now. Okay, the one area in which we do see some improvements, all right, in Japan's economy, or a group of workers that did experience some improvements, all right, would be the Japan's countryside. Okay, we know from earlier, all right, tenant farmers were the ones who were most negatively impacted in the early 1920s and worse still after the Great Depression. Farmers were heavily in debt, struggling to pay their rent and taxes. Government went in to increase public works to provide for jobs, right? So if they can't find, if they can't continue being a tenant farmer, they could work in construction. All right. The government in 1932 launched the campaign for economic revitalization. All right, which is like a propaganda campaign and practical proposals to strengthen the countryside. The aim is to actually bring in science or scientific methods in order to improve crop growth or improve crop yield, which would ultimately ease their ease the burden of the tenant farmers, right? So this would be considered as something positive if you need a factor to use to argue that things got better. All right. Next up, control of Japanese thought. All right. So what you have would be the government being very focused on maintaining control, right, through propaganda to promote loyalty to the state and emperor. So this would be introduced in the campaigns. This would be introduced in education, right? As part of the campaign for economic revitalization, there's that aspect here as well. This campaign for economic revitalization is also considered as an example of social changes. So very good detail to know because you can use it in two areas. The role of the peasants to be that very peaceful and hardworking. Women praised in their traditional roles. Right. So in having this campaign, you are also in essentially controlling Japanese the vision of what a good Japanese farmer should be, what a good Japanese woman should be, and at the same time getting them to also be better farmers and be better at their job. Okay, but all these campaigns are widely seen as an attempt to control Japanese thought, right? Okay, other attempts included a network of discussion councils, all right, to represent workers and managers. Let's put that in, all right, to reduce conflict. Right, again, for the government trying to reinforce this idea that you all don't need to argue, you're all in service of the emperor. Okay, that sort of intent behind this campaign. There, of course, was the Information and Propaganda Committee that was set up in 1936 to further control the media. Oh my, yeah. Yeah, to further control the media, and you cannot represent emperor in a bad light. Okay, so yeah, you had a special police force to actually enforce this. Okay, right. Last bit, I realized that I'm no longer highlighting things already. Yeah, taking a lot more time than I thought I would. Last bit, control of education. Okay, you had okay, from the time of the Showa Restoration, already a strong emphasis on building national pride, traditions, building loyalty to the emperor. They would stress Shinto beliefs. Okay, okay, where loyalty to the emperor is of dire importance, and this would be taught in schools to impressionable kids and all that. The Ministry of their Ministry of Education, not ours, published a document in 1937 called Fundamentals of Our National Polity. Right, where to inculcate Japanese traditional ethics, to inculcate patriotism, large amounts of patriotism. This would include physical exercise. You can try to find these connections with other other militaries government or authoritarian governments where such features are quite clear. You can think of what's going on in Germany as well at that point of time. And yeah. Okay, if you don't already know, very similar to what you would see for the Hitler Youth as well. Right, so that will bring us to the end of this revision for the military, rise of rise of militarism in Japan. Right. Once you're done with this, it's important to try and see, look at questions and see which parts of the chapter or which parts of the mind map will be most useful. Other things you could do with the mind map would be if you're looking at, for example, impact. Maybe you can also look at ranking some of the factors, which one had the most damaging effect on Japan, which one had the most positive impact on Japan. So all this would train your mind to actually start to look deeper into each factor, right? I think I should stop talking already. Oops. We're done.